Today we are going to make chocolate chips sourdough bread. We're also going to have red and green trees design on it because it's December and Christmas will be here soon. If you haven't already, be sure to check out my first sourdough bread video where I share all the important tips and techniques to help you successfully make your own sourdough bread on your first try. I'll provide the link in the description below. Let's get started. My starter has already doubled in size. Mix the water and the active starter first so that the starter is nicely incorporated. Add the flour and cocoa powder. I like to sieve the cocoa powder in because they tend to clump up in the storage container. Then add the sugar and salt. Mix until there's no remaining dry flour on the surface. This is good. It's mixed but shaggy. Place a damp towel over it and let it rest for 30 minutes. Next, we move into developing that gluten structure in the dough through a stretch and fold process, which is going to be about 2 hours long. Wet your hands so the dough won't stick to your hands. Lift the dough up, gently shake and stretch it as far as you can without tearing it. Fold it over and repeat this process on each side by turning your bowl after each stretch. There's no rule on how many times or how long you should do this. Your dough will get harder and harder to stretch. That's because we are developing gluten and it's strengthening our dough. I did 16 stretches and folds and it's quite tight already. It may be more or less for you. Cover it with a damp towel again and let it rest for 30 minutes. For the second stretch and fold process, I'm going to do what is called lamination. Spread some water on the counter to prevent sticking. We will stretch the dough as far as possible without tearing. Lamination is a process by which we spread out the dough into a very thin sheet and stretch the gluten strands in the process. Then we fold the stretched dough onto itself and this will build dough strength. Lamination is great when you want to add fillings to your bread. In this case, I'm adding chocolate chips during the process. Another great addition to pair with the chocolate is walnuts or dry cranberries. So if you have those on hand, you can add some to it. Once folded back onto itself, tighten all sides and let it rest again for 30 minutes. For the next 2 sets of stretch and fold, I'm going to do coil folds instead. You may have noticed there are many fancy terms in sourdough bread making. Coil fold is simply a folding technique used to develop gluten in a gentle manner. My dough is already quite nice and tight. For the next 2 sets, if I want to just stretch and fold it, I won't be able to do much with it. And I might risk tearing the nice gluten structure that has already been developed. So coil folds are more ideal in this situation because by lifting it up and let gravity do the work, the dough can be stretched a little more while still keeping all the nice strength in itself. As you can see, after just 8 coil folds, the dough is very tight and not stretching much anymore. Cover it with a damp towel again and let it rest for 30 minutes. At this point, I'm also going to lightly grease the vessel that I will place the dough in for bulk fermentation. I'm using a clear container with a straight side, and the width is not too much bigger than the dough ball to do the bulk rise so I can easily tell when it's done. This is the 4th and last set of stretching and folding. Remember, you could overfold your dough. Whatever folding technique you choose should gently build up the gluten network. Once the gluten network has formed, overhandling the dough can cause this network to break down. So do not go by what bakers tell you about how many minutes you should stretch and fold your dough and how many times to fold in each set. Observe the changes in your dough and stop when it's nice and tight. Generally speaking, you should aim to do around 4 to 6 sets, but you may need less depending on the dough strength. So how do you know when to stop? You see, once I get to the 4th coil fold, the dough has completely changed. It is smooth, it's supple, starting to pull away from the side a little bit, and you can see the rounded edge on the side of your dough. Before that, the dough just sunk into the side and made a flat surface. If at this stage your dough is still not holding together, then you can add 1 or 2 sets of stretch and folds. Transfer the dough into the container. Cover it up nicely. Do not use a towel, use a lid or plastic wrap. If you use a towel, it may develop dry skin on the surface and will prevent it from rising. Tie a rubber band to roughly mark where this dough is right now. Keep in mind the dough is rounded and puffy now. As it sits, it will spread out. So when marking the height now, I'm going to mark it somewhere in the middle. Once it's about double in size, I know it's done. I say it's about double in size. Doesn't actually have to be double because bulk fermentation begins once the starter hits the dough, which means the hour you spend stretching and folding also goes into the total hours. This proofing method is great because you can observe the rise and see when it comes to the mark that we want it to be, which is like about 70%. The ideal temperature for bulk fermentation is about 75 to 80 degrees. 4 hours later, the dough has risen to where I want it to be. That means my total bulk fermentation time is about 6 hours. To know if it's ready is to look for signs of fermentation. You should see some bubbles on top of your dough. See how the top still has a dome shape? This means that the yeast is still raising the dough and still have strength to continue the process. This is also a good sign. Now we are done bulk fermenting our dough, we are going to move on to shaping. Lightly spray some water on the counter to prevent sticking. Gently transfer the dough onto the counter. Be careful that you are not deflating a lot of air out of it. We want to preserve the air in it, and this is very different from other yeast dough where you often press all the air out before you shape it. Now there's an option step right before the final shaping that is called pre-shaping. What this does is to let the dough start forming into a shape but let it relax, so when you do your final shaping, it works with you to get into that shape and hold its structure nicely. Stretch the dough into a square, then fold each corner over. For the last side, pull it all the way over into a dough ball. Tuck all sides under, then drag it a couple of times to increase the dough's surface tension, giving it a better structure. Let it sit on the counter, cover with a damp towel or leave it on the cover are both fine, for 20 to 30 minutes. Prepare the basket that you're going to use for the final proof by dusting it with rice flour. The reason rice flour is preferred instead of wheat flour is because rice flour doesn't have the same proteins in it that wheat flour does, so it's not going to create gluten. When you put your bread dough in your basket, there's moisture in your bread, and if there are wheat flour in your basket, it's going to start creating those gluten strands and it's more likely to stick to your basket. If you haven't already, be sure to check out my previous video on sourdough too and learn how to prep your proofing basket. If you're using bread, flour, or all-purpose flour, be sure to flour a basket very generously. For the final shaping, I'm switching from water to flour for a non-sticking agent. Remember that there's no perfect way to shape your dough. There are many techniques out there and you just need to find the best one for you. Shape the dough into a square. Fold 1/3 of it to the middle, then the other side. Roll into a log shape. Roll the log up. Now seam side up, crisscross the seam so it's securely attached. Roll it up again with a gentle stretch while rolling. Now drag it a couple of times to generate surface tension. This way the shape is nice and tight and even both ends are nicely tucked without any spiral seam. Strengthening surface tension helps create a firm, smooth surface that will hold its shape during the final rise and baking. Once it's done, transfer it to the basket, smooth side down, seam side up. Notice you can barely see any seam. That's the beauty of dragging the dough to create tension. Dust the top with a little bit of rice flour. Cover it with a towel. Time for final proof. I'm going to proof this overnight in the fridge. Once it's in the fridge, it will be ready to bake in the next 12 to 24 hours. Now we're going to prepare the red and green flour to dust the dough tomorrow. Put some rice flour in a Ziploc bag and add gel food color in it. Keep rubbing it until it's evenly colored. You can keep adding more color if needed to achieve the shade you like. Another way to color the rice flour is to use natural ingredients. I have this red beet powder with me, so I will use this instead of gel food color. Simply combine this with the rice flour and that's it. If you have matcha powder, you can mix that with rice flour for the green color. On the next day, preheat the oven to 450 degrees with a Dutch oven in it. Take the dough out of the fridge. This has been sitting in the fridge for about 16 hours. Dust off any excess flour. Spray some water on top so the rice flour will stick on it better. Put a piece of paper over it. Spray some water to wet the paper so it will stick with the dough and easier to handle. I pre-cut this with a zigzag line for the tree's design. Lift up one side and dust the first color. When done, cover it back up, lift the other side and dust the second color. Now carefully remove the paper and dust more flour for any missing spots. Next, we are going to score the bread. Scoring is important to control where the steam will escape from the dough during baking. For the main zigzag line, the cut will be a bit deeper to direct most steam to escape here to create the main split. Next, cut some tiny lines for each section. Finally, use a pair of scissors to make some cuts so they will look more like a tree. Carefully transfer it into the Dutch oven and bake with the lid on for 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, remove the lid and bake for 20 more minutes or longer if you want a darker crust. And this is it. Now the final step is very important. That is, to let your bread cool completely before you slice it. This is not easy because it's very tempting to cut into it once it's out of the oven to see how it goes. But letting the bread cool completely will help trapping all the moisture in. If you cut into it while it's still hot, it's going to release all that moisture and it's going to stand really quickly. Texture of your bread is also going to be very gummy. So at the very minimum, let it cool for at least an hour, but preferably for a few hours or overnight. You can generally expect sourdough to last for 4 to 5 days at room temperature. Just keep it in an airtight container, bread box or a large plastic bag. Sourdough can be frozen for up to 6 months. It is important to make sure the bread is completely cool before freezing. You can either freeze your sourdough loaf whole or slice it before freezing. Slicing makes it easy to take out just 1 or 2 slices as required. To thaw frozen sourdough, simply take it out from the freezer and let it thaw overnight at room temperature. If they are sliced, you can just toast it before eating. If they are whole, uncut, bake it in the oven at 350 degrees for 15 to 20 minutes. Hope you find this video helpful and you will now try to make your own delicious sourdough bread. Thanks so much for watching.